As World War III continues to evolve around us, our president is now mobilizing reserve troops. And I had some questions about this. A lot of people did, in fact. We have Senator Mike Lee, who is trying to cobble together what this means exactly. Vivek, running for president, is sounding the alarm bells on this. In fact, Vivek said the following when he got wind of this. He posted this on Twitter, and this is something it feels like a lot of the media is ignoring. He says, "It's downright disturbing that the U.S. media is ignoring the fact that Biden is ordering 3,000 members of the selected reserve or individual ready reserve to Europe, quote, for the effective conduct of Operation Atlantic Resolve." What? The last time there was an IRR call-up was during the Iraq War, when the justification was, quote, non-existent weapons of mass destruction held by Saddam. What's the justification now? What are the operations? Where will they go? What will they do? John Kirby's going to tell us they're going to be making lunches or something. We need answers, not just sweeping this under the rug as Biden would prefer. This comes just 3 days after the Biden White House told Congress it wants to remove a provision of the annual defense policy bill that would create a special inspector general for Ukraine aid. In other words, they don't want oversight of the money. Why? What are we not supposed to know? I'm equally sad and shocked that I have to ask questions that the mainstream press and much of the GOP won't, because they're all on Team Ukraine. Zelensky consolidated the Ukrainian media into a single state media network to avoid questions during the war. Even worse, the same thing appears to be happening here at home. Pray that asking such questions won't soon be alleged as a violation of the Espionage Act, which is what Donald Trump is being prosecuted under. And everybody out there who says that if you're not aligned hard enough with Ukraine, you're a Putin stooge. These people are nuts. Meanwhile, there's a contingent of which Donald Trump belongs that just want the war to end or tired of seeing the killings. And maybe there's a way to facilitate that without, as Jake Sullivan and the Biden administration has already dictated, charging Putin with war crimes in the International Criminal Court. Don't think that's a reasonable way to start the resolution, even if that's something that you think is appropriate. So Vivek is pounding the alarm on this. We also have reaction from Mike Lee. But this was something that I thought was interesting. Now, if you go to the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs, they'll provide data that was consolidated into a chart that looks like this. I'm asking myself, all right, well, what does that mean exactly? When they're saying that they're going to mobilize the selected reserve and different components of the individual ready reserve, these are the different categories of manpower. So you see at the top, total reserve manpower listed here. You've got the ready reserve, then you've got the standby reserve, then you've got the retired reserve, right? So it looks like you're going from left to right on who gets activated, what priorities. So the retired, they're last. Standby, all right, if you're on an active list or inactive list, we go to you last, but otherwise you're part of the ready reserve. And they're going to start with certain members of the individual ready reserve, and sounds like the entire selected reserve, which if you look at that component, there is units, the individual mobilization augmentees, IMAs, active guard and reserve, and then drilling reservists and a training pipeline, non-deployable accounts. So that's a pretty substantial selection of the ready reserve, is my point. It's essentially 2 branches, 1.5, depending on how many are being activated, what certain members are being activated. And this could be a fluid dynamic number that just changes over time. So you've got what looks to be, pretty significant shift that's happening, and certain people are concerned about that. Now, here's what the executive order actually looks like. It's not all that interesting, but it was published by the president. It says ordering, you see here, the selected reserve and the individual ready reserve, certain members of that, those 2 buckets, certain members of those are going to be activated. He says, I'm the president. The law says I can do this. We're going to be mobilizing for Operation Atlantic Resolve. And we're going to see what that means. John Kirby's going to explain it in a minute. I authorize the Secretary of Defense to do the following things: a total not to exceed 3,000 total members at any one time, of whom not more than 450 may be members of the IRR, as they deem necessary. So, short order, but some people are a little bit nervous about this because it feels like we have American troops now going into a theater of war to a higher degree, and we're concerned about that. John Kirby says nothing to be worried about. This is just standard business. Here's what he says.
Now, back to the European continent and this announcement by the Pentagon. I think it's important to keep this in context. We've already increased by 20,000 the number of troops that we have on the European continent, and by and large, we've been able to keep that rotational presence there. So you got more than 80,000 troops there in Europe, and that's a lot. And what we're going to do with the small number of 3,000 reservists or National Guardsmen, these are people that are specialists in things like administrative functions, logistics, supply, maybe medical, dental, those kinds of the kind of enabling functions that you need to be able to support and sustain a large troop presence for a long time. And what this is basically is a realization of the fact that we know, the president knows, that the security environment in Europe is changed, not has changed, not will change. It's changed now. And we've got to make sure that we've got the proper force posture to be able to support an additional eastern flank presence for the long haul.
And we'll see if that executive order gets amended and that number slowly starts to creep up as more resources are dumped into this theater. But Senator Mike Lee, a little bit nervous about this as well. Here's what he had to say about this over from Utah. He says, look, I'm trying to figure out what this means, all right? Bottom line up front, President Biden is arguably walking the U.S. up to the line of war and daring Russia to shoot first. Well, that doesn't sound good. He says, under U.S. law, it gives the president the authority to augment the forces of any named operational mission to active duty for not more than 365 consecutive days. Operation Atlantic Resolve has existed since 2014 and is an official named U.S. military mission that deploys forces on a rotational basis, mainly to the Baltic states and Poland. So it's been going on for a while. They're just rotating people through it. Open source information on Operation Atlantic Resolve from the DoD does not suggest any forces are present in Ukraine under this mission. Since conflict with Russia and Ukraine came to blows in 2014, rotational deployments under Atlantic Resolve have been considered a backbone of deterring Russia from crossing NATO's eastern flank. The active duty activation and the deployment of these additional forces, Senator Mike Lee says, is a dangerous provocation, knowing full well NATO's eastern flank is adjacent to active hostilities. They say President Biden did the same thing at the beginning of the war in Ukraine in 2022, massively increasing our active duty force presence when we knew hostilities were imminent. But now it's even more risky because hostilities are active. Not only does this run the risk of further locking us into supporting Ukraine, which is exactly what they want. I mean, it's interesting timing on this. They were just going around, skipping around the gardens together. Biden wasn't skipping, more like tripping. But they were, broing it up over there. And Biden was sitting there across him in the chairs. We're not leaving whether you like it or not, like, a psycho ex-girlfriend. So this is a situation where he's saying, yeah, this is just locking them in indefinitely. Now the military-industrial complex will say the U.S. military presence is the one thing preventing Russia from crossing NATO's eastern border, and that we have to maintain such a presence indefinitely. Which means, this probably means a long-term security guarantee. Another endless war, but this time by proxy, which is exactly what they want. Lee says one could argue that unilateral troop activations, deployments like this, into areas of active war hostilities should be treated as a breach of the War Powers Act. Regardless, this makes me really uneasy. And, as we know, these things do take time, and World War II lasted a year, and the consequences were pretty severe. And so we're asking ourselves, what inning are we in this game? And slowly but surely, it seems like boiling frogs every day, things continue to escalate.